Welcome back to Gardens and Guitars. Today looks like we will be having some burgundy bush beans. Can't really get those in the shot because of the shade. So I knew today was the first squash harvest of the year. I did not realize I'd be eating green beans today too. That's great. Green beans don't really like hot weather. We've already had a couple days in the upper 90s. But at the same time, green beans won't tolerate frost, and that's one of our issues here. We go from frost sometimes as late as early April into 100-degree weather by May, so that spring season doesn't really exist here. It goes from a very mild winter to an extremely hot summer very quickly, which is why green beans are a little bit more challenging here. Our standard bean is the cowpea. So unlike your green bean, which is, the green bean is not particularly heat tolerant, cowpeas are. Cowpeas are in a different genus. They're in the same family. Your green beans are Phaseolus, whereas your cowpeas are Vigna. And they're both Fabaceae legume family, but they have very different preferences for environment. Green beans kind of like fairly cool temperatures, don't mind some shade. Cowpeas are a full sun plant that really like hot weather. So I will be picking the green beans today, but more importantly, today is our first squash harvest of the year. So I switched to pretty much only eating produce in season a couple years ago, with the sole exception of a couple things I can't grow here. I can't grow apples here, and I cannot grow bananas here, so I will buy apples and bananas every day of the year. But any type of produce that can be grown here, I tend to only eat when I'm growing it. So it has been 319 days since I have had a squash, summer squash. No zucchini, no yellow crookneck, no patty pan, scallop, UFO squashes for 319 days now, because we get pickleworm, tropical moth, caterpillar pest, pretty early in the year, usually beginning of July. I don't spray anything because I'm busy and lazy, and I could come out with organic BT to deal with pickleworm, but I just don't bother. So my squash season is pretty short. I plant the squash, the first week of April usually. I try to pick short season varieties that are 35, 40 days. I harvest as much squash as I can between May and July, and after about July, that's it. And then I don't eat squash again until the next May. It's a shame though, because it's my absolute favorite summer vegetable. So this is the sabering variety here. These are the golden zooks. You can see how large and firm these are. So these should have been harvested a couple days ago, but I wanted to wait until I could make a garden video before I harvested them. Looks like there's vine borer in here. So I got a tip today from an entomologist friend of mine who told me to take little sewing needles and poke holes into the vine borer larvae, which hopefully won't really damage the plant, but it will in fact kill the vine borer larvae before the vine borer larvae destroy my squash plants. Like I said, these zucchinis are a little bit large here. You can see one is even starting to fatten up a little bit, indicating that the seed might be maturing, which reduces the culinary qualities. But I haven't been able to make a garden video. My crazy neighbor who hates my garden and has made multiple threats of violence over the garden has been home a lot, and I just don't come outside when he's home. Wow, that is really on there. So one of my side projects was trying to develop powdery mildew resistance and old-fashioned squash flavor in one cultivar. There's a lot of cultivars of squash, modern varieties, that are powdery mildew resistant, but they don't particularly taste amazing. They don't have that good old-fashioned, really strong squash flavor. They're kind of bland. Whereas some of your old heirloom squashes tend to have a lot of flavor, but they don't have any modern disease resistance. You can see quite a few UFO scallop squashes under there. I think in total there's probably 50-something squash plants in the garden this year, and the vast majority of them are the sabering F1 golden zucchinis, which are powdery mildew resistant. And the rest are old heirloom varieties And wow, this one needed to be picked quite a while ago, and I completely missed it. I didn't even know this one was here. But yeah, it should be a pretty good squash crop this year, and I'm hoping to save seed, if possible, from a few. And you know, the bees are going to move pollen between all the different squash plants, and I'm going to keep saving seed for the next couple years. And my goal is to select for something that has powdery mildew resistance and also has really strong old-timey squash flavor. Whether or not I will be successful is another story. Here's one of the striped Italian heirloom Zukes. I may end up having to can some of this stuff just because there's too much of it out here. I've never canned squash before, but I had a neighbor with a large garden who did can some squash last year. Wow. So these tomato plants are not doing particularly well because I didn't stake them, because I guess that would make the garden even more unsightly. I've had the city out here twice telling me the garden needs to have less weeds in it. I tried to explain that most of the vegetation in between the rows of the garden plants is not weeds, but rather it is specific cover crops planted to suppress weeds like crimson clover and annual winter ryegrass. But most of the people who end up in code enforcement aren't really botanists. They don't tend to have a whole lot of farm experience. So they did not take me at my word that most of the vegetation was in fact cover crops that I planted intentionally. So I had to mow down most of the crimson clover and the annual ryegrass. And the last thing I was going to do was come out here and put out tomato stakes when they're already upset about the unsightliness of the garden. I'm a firm believer in private property rights and an individual's right to grow food, as well as an individual's right to privacy on their own property. But we live in a society where we are opportunistic tyrants. We talk a big game about the importance of liberty and freedom, and we love to condemn foreign dictators and, you know, condemn all these tyrants in foreign countries, but we often behave like tyrants right in our own backyards when we have the first chance to do so. There's already a few UFO squashes that I've picked that are in the house. I'm not going to bring those out just for the video. I'm actually in a hurry because I need to get over to the trailer where I used to have the swamp garden that many of you will remember. You can definitely see the effect of shade. The plants that are further out here in full sun are much larger than the plants that are closer to the house and are shaded for a good portion of the day. I want to do a full garden tour at some point, but today I'm just a little bit busy, unfortunately. I've been working a lot of 12 and 15-hour days, and I just haven't had a whole lot of time to make garden videos. I haven't had much time to work in the garden. This plant here is about to get yeeted. This is clearly not doing well. There's no point in allowing things that are struggling to continue taking up space. I like really strong selection pressures. I tend to reward the vegetables that are growing well, and I tend to just yeet the ones that show signs of poor quality. It's particularly important if you want to save seed each year. Well, that's probably the end of today's little squash and zucchini harvest, but thank y'all for tuning in. I might combine this with some footage from the backyard later today and see if I can do a full garden tour at some point, but thank y'all for tuning in. Hope you learned something about green beans and different species of bean and their differences in heat tolerance, as well as some differences between zucchini and squash types. Everything in the garden right now in terms of squash is all cucurbita pepo. That's your standard summer squash that includes all of your UFO types, your green zucchinis, your yellow zucchinis, your white zucchinis. All of those are pepo, your summer squashes. You can make crosses between any of those because they are all the same species. And again, the goal is to develop something that has some modern disease resistance, like the golden zukes here, and good yields, and combine that with something that has some old-timey, strong squash flavor, like some of these UFOs, or these white Italian zucchinis, or that striped zucchini we looked at earlier. Thank you all for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon in the garden.